Okay, so I made another tea. It is 9 p.m. and I am looking to have a relaxing yet exciting evening. So that calls for tea. I got some roasted dandelion root tea. Put it here in this cup. This cup is made of clay in Mexico, so it gives your drinks that earthy feeling. In another video, I'll make a café de olla, which is also made in a pot, an olla, of this material to give it that earthy taste. And I'll read a chapter while it steeps. Chapter 25. JP had cooked up some good buckwheat pancakes, and we had log cabin syrup to go with them, and a little butter. I asked him what the gochami chant meant. That's the chant they give out for the 3 meals in Buddhist monasteries in Japan. It means Buddham Saranam Gochami, I take refuge in the Buddha. Sangam, I take refuge in the church. Dhammam, I take refuge in the Dharma, the truth. Tomorrow morning, I'll make you another nice breakfast. Some slumgullion. Do you ever eat good old-fashioned slumgullion, boy? Tain't nothing but scrambled eggs and potatoes all scrambled up together. It's a lumberjack meal? There ain't no such thing as a lumberjack. That must be a back east expression. Up here we call them loggers. Come on, eat up your pancakes and we'll go down and split logs, and I'll show you how to handle a double-bitted axe. He took the axe out and sharpened it and showed me how to sharpen it. And don't ever use his axe on a piece of wood that's on the ground. You'll hit rocks and blunt it. Always have a log or something for a block. I went out to the privy, and coming back wishing to surprise JP with a Zen trick, I threw the roll of toilet paper through the open window, and he let out a big samurai warrior roar and appeared on the windowsill in his boots and shorts with a dagger in his hand and jumped 15 feet down into the loggy yard. It was crazy. We started downhill, feeling high. All the logs that had been bucked had more or less of a crack in them, where you more or less inserted the heavy iron wedge, and then raising a 5-pound sledgehammer over your head, standing way back so it's not to hit your own ankle, you brought it down conco on the wedge and split the log clean in half. Then you'd sit the half logs up on the block log and let down with the double-bitted axe, a long beautiful axe, sharp as a razor, and fa-wap, you had quarter logs. Then you set up a quarter log and brought down to an eighth. He showed me how to swing the sledge and the axe not too hard, but when he got mad himself, I noticed he swung the axe as hard as he could, roaring his famous cry, or cursing. Pretty soon, I had the knack and was going along as though I'd been doing it all my life. Christine came out in the yard to watch us and called, I'll have some nice lunch for you. Okay. JP and Christine were like brother and sister. We split a lot of logs. It was great swinging down the sledgehammer, all the weight clank on top of the wedge, and feeling that log give. If not the first time, the second time. The smell of sawdust, pine trees, the breeze blowing over the placid mountains from the sea, the meadowlarks singing, the butterflies in the grass. It was perfect. Then we went in and ate a good lunch of hot dogs and rice and soup and red wine and Christine's fresh biscuits, and sat there cross-legged and barefoot, thumbing through Sean's vast library. Did you hear about the disciple who asked the Zen master what is the Buddha? No. What? The Buddha is a dried piece of turd, was the answer. The disciple experienced sudden enlightenment. Simple shit, I said. Do you know what sudden enlightenment is? One disciple came to a master and answered his koan, and the master hit him with a stick and knocked him off the veranda 10 feet into the mud puddle. The disciple got up and laughed. He later became a master himself. 'Twasn't by words he was enlightened, but by that great healthy push off the porch. all wallowing in mud, to prove the crystal truth of compassion, I thought. I wasn't about to start advertising my words out loud anymore to Japhie. Woo! He yelled, throwing a flower at my head. Do you know how Kasyapa became the first patriarch? The Buddha was about to start expounding the sutra, and 1,250 bhikkhus were waiting with their garments arranged and their feet crossed, and all the Buddha did was raise a flower. Everybody was perturbed. The Buddha didn't say nothing, only Kasyapa smiled. That was how the Buddha selected Kasyapa. That's known as the flower sermon, boy. I went in the kitchen and got a banana and came out and said, well, I'll tell you what nirvana is. What? I ate the banana and threw the peel away and said nothing. That's the banana sermon. Whew, yelled Japhie. Did I ever tell you about Coyote, old man, and how him and Silver Fox started the world by stomping an empty space till a little ground appeared beneath their feet? Look at this picture, by the way. This is the famous bulls. It was an ancient Chinese cartoon, showing first a young boy going out into the wilderness with a small staff and pack, like an American Nat Wills tramp of 1905. And in later panels, he discovers an ox, tries to tame, tries to ride it, finally does tame it and ride it, but then abandons the ox and just sits in the moonlight meditating. Finally, you see him coming down from the mountains of enlightenment, and then suddenly, the next panel shows absolutely nothing at all, followed by a panel showing blossoms in a tree. Then the last picture you see, the young boy is a big, fat, old, laughing wizard with a huge bag on his back, and he's going into the city to get drunk with the butchers, enlightened, and another new young boy is going up to the mountain with a little pack and staff. It goes on and on. The disciples and the masters go through the same thing. First they have to find and tame the ox of their mind essence, and then abandon that. Then finally, they attain to nothing, as represented by this empty panel. Then having attained nothing, they attain everything, which is springtime blossoms in the trees, so they end up coming down to the city to get drunk with the butchers like Li Po. That was a very wise cartoon. It reminded me of my own experience, trying to tame my mind in the woods, then realizing it was all empty and awake, and I didn't have to do anything. And now I was getting drunk with the butcher Japhie. We played records and lounged around smoking, then went out and cut more wood. Then as it got cool late afternoon, we went to the shack and washed and dressed up for the big Saturday night party. During the day, Japhie went up and down the hill at least 10 times to make phone calls and see Christine and get bread and bring up sheets for his girl that night. When he had a girl, he put out clean sheets on his thin mattress on the straw mats, a ritual. But I just sat around in the grass doing nothing, or writing haikus, or watching the old vulture circling the hill. Must be something dead around here, I figured. Japhie said, why do you sit on your ass all day? I practice do nothing. What's the difference? Burn it. My Buddhism is activity, said Japhie, rushing off down the hill again. Then I could hear him sawing wood and whistling in the distance. He couldn't stop jiggling for a minute. His meditations were regular things. By the clock, he'd meditated first thing waking in the morning. Then he had his mid-afternoon meditation, only about 3 minutes long. Then before going to bed, and that was that. But I just ambled and dreamed around. We were two strange, dissimilar monks on the same path. I took a shovel, however, and leveled the ground near the rosebush where my bed of grass was. It was a little too slanty for comfort. I fixed it just right, and that night I slept well after the big wine party. The big party was wild. Japhie had a girl called Polly Whitmore come out to see him, a beautiful brunette with a Spanish hairdo and dark eyes, a regular raving beauty actually, mountain climber too. She'd just been divorced and lived alone in Millbrae, and Christine's brother Whitey Jones brought his fiancée Patsy, and of course Sean came home from work and cleaned up for the party. Another guy came out for the weekend, big blonde Bud Diefendorf, who worked as the janitor in the Buddhist Association to earn his rent and attend classes free. A big, mild, pipe-smoking Buddha with all kinds of strange ideas. I liked Bud. He was intelligent, and I liked the fact that he had started out as a physicist at the University of Chicago, then gone from that to philosophy, and finally now to philosophy's dreadful murderer, Buddha. He said, I had a dream one time that I was sitting under a tree picking on a lute and singing, I ain't got no name. I was the no-name bhikkhu. It was so pleasing to meet so many Buddhists after that harsh road hitchhiking. Sean was a strange mystical Buddhist with a mind full of superstitions and premonitions. I believe in devils, he said. Well, I said, stroking his little daughter's hair, all little children know that everybody goes to heaven, to which he assented tenderly with a sad nod of his bearded skull. He was very kind. He kept saying aye all the time, which went with his old boat that was anchored out in the bay and kept being scuttled by storms, and we had to row it out and bail it out in the cold gray fog. Just a little old wreck of a boat, about 12 feet long, with no cabin to speak of, nothing but a ragged hull floating in the water around a rusty anchor. Whitey Jones, Christine's brother, was a sweet young kid of 20 who never said anything and just smiled and took ribbons without complaint. For instance, the party finally got pretty wild, and the three couples took all their clothes off and danced a kind of quaint, innocent polka, all hand in hand around the parlor, as the kiddies slept in their cribs. This didn't disturb Bud and me at all. We went right on smoking our pipes and discussing Buddhism in the corner. In fact, that was best because we didn't have girls of our own, and those were three well-stacked nymphs dancing there. But JP and Sean dragged Patsy into the bedroom and pretended to be trying to make her, to bug Whitey, who blushed all red, stark naked, and there were wrestlings and laughs all around the house. Bud and I were sitting there cross-legged with naked dancing girls in front of us and laughed to realize that it was a mighty familiar occasion. Seems like in some previous lifetime, Ray, said Bud. You and I were monks in some monastery in Tibet where the girls danced for us before Yam Yam. Yeah. And we were the old monks who weren't interested in sex anymore, but Sean and JP and Whitey were the young monks, and were still full of the fire of evil and still had a lot to learn. Every now and then, Bud and I looked at all that flesh and licked our lips in secret. But most of the time, actually, during these naked revels, I just kept my eyes closed and listened to the music. I was really sincerely keeping lust out of my mind by main force and gritting of my teeth. And the best way was to keep my eyes closed. In spite of the nakedness and all, it was really a gentle little home party, and everybody began yawning for time for bed. Whitey went off with Patsy. Jaffe went up the hill with Polly and took her to his fresh sheets, and I unrolled my sleeping bag by the rosebush and slept. Bud had brought his own sleeping bag and rolled out on Sean's straw mat floor. In the morning, Bud came up and lit his pipe and sat in the grass chatting to me as I rubbed my eyes to wake him. During the day, Sunday, all kinds of other people came calling on the Monahans, and half of them came up the hill to see the pretty shack and the two crazy famous bhikkhus, Jaffe and Ray. Among them were Princess, Alva, and Warren Coughlin. Sean spread out a board in the yard and put out a royal table of wine and hamburgers and pickles and lit a big bonfire and took out his two guitars, and it was really a magnificent kind of way to live in the sunny California. I realized, with all this fine Dharma connected with it, and mountain climbing. All of them had rucksacks and sleeping bags, and some of them were going hiking that next day to the Marin County trails, which are beautiful. So the party was divided into three parts all the time. Those in the living room listening to the hi-fi or thumbing through books, those in the yard eating and listening to the guitar music, and those on the hilltop in the shack brewing pots of tea and sitting cross-legged discussing poetry and things, and the Dharma or wandering around in the high meadow to go see the children fly kites or old ladies ride by on horseback. Every weekend was the same mild picnic. A regular classical scene of angels and dolls having a kind of flowery time in the void, like the void in the cartoon of the bulls, the blossom branch. I think my tea's ready. So normally you want to have it covered to maintain all the herbal benefits of the tea. And then once it's nice and steeped, you want to gently squeeze. Squeeze very gently so as to not rip the bag. And then you could taste all the benefits of it. That's good. Bud and I sat on the hill watching kites. That kite won't go high enough. It hasn't a long enough tail, I said. Bud said, "Say, that's great. That reminds me of my main problem in my meditations. The reason why I can't get really high into nirvana is because my tail isn't long enough. He puffed and pondered seriously over this. He was the most serious guy in the world. He pondered it all night, and the next morning said, "Last night I saw myself as a fish swimming through the void of the sea, going left and right in the water, without knowing the meaning of left and right. But because of my fin, I did so, that is, my kite tail. So I'm a Buddha fish, and my fin is my wisdom." "That was pretty infinite, that kite," says I. "Throughout all these parties, I always stole off for a nap under the eucalyptus trees instead of by my rosebush, which was all hot sun all day. In the shade of the trees I rested well. One afternoon, I just gazed at the topmost branches of those immensely tall trees. I began to notice that the uppermost twigs and leaves were lyrical happy dancers, glad that they had been apportioned to the top, with all that rumbling experience of the whole tree swaying beneath them, making their dance, their every jiggle, a huge and communal and mysterious necessity dance, and so just floating up there in the void, dancing in the meaning of the tree. I noticed how the leaves almost looked human, the way they bowed and then leaped up and then swayed lyrically side to side. It was a crazy vision in my mind, but beautiful. Another time under those trees, I dreamt I saw a purple throne all covered with gold, some kind of eternity pope or patriarch in it, and Rosie somewhere, and at that moment Cody was in the shack yakking to some guys, and it seemed that he was to the left of this vision as some kind of archangel, and when I opened my eyes I saw it was the only sun against my eyelids. And as I say, that hummingbird, a beautiful little blue hummingbird, no bigger than a dragonfly, kept making a whistling jet dive at me, definitely saying hello to me, every day, usually in the morning, and I always yelled back at him, greeting. Finally, he began to hover in the open window of the shack, buzzing. There was his furious wings, looking at me beadily. Then flash, he was gone. That California humming guy. Though sometimes I was afraid he would drive right into my head with his long beaker like a hat pin. There was also an old rat scrambling in the cellar under the shack, and it was a good thing to keep the door closed at night. My other great friends were the ants, a colony of them that wanted to come in the shack and find the money. Calling all ants, come and get your honey," sang a little boy one day in the shack. So I went out to their anthill and made a trail of honey leading them into the back garden, and they were at that new vein of joy for a week. I even got down on my knees and talked to the ants. There were beautiful flowers all around the shack, red, purple, pink, white. We kept making bouquets, but the prettiest of all was the one Jaffe made, just pine cones and a sprig of pine needles. It had that simple look that characterized all his life. He'd come barging into the shack with his saw and see me sitting there and say, "Why did you sit around all day?" "I am the Buddha known as the quitter." Then it would be when Jaffe's face would crease up in that funny little boy laugh of his, like a Chinese boy laughing, crow's tracks appearing on each side of his eyes and his long mouth cracking open. He was so pleased with me sometimes. Everybody loved Jaffe. The girls, Polly and Princess, and even Mary Christine, were all madly in love with him, and they were all secretly jealous of Jaffe's favorite doll, Psyche, who came the following weekend real cute in jeans and a little white collar falling over her black turtleneck sweater, and a tender little body and face. Jaffe had told me he was a bit in love with her himself, but he had a hard time convincing her to make love. He had to get her drunk. Once she got drinking, she couldn't stop. That weekend she came, Jaffe made a slumgullion for all the three of us in the shack. Then we borrowed Sean's jalopy and drove about 100 miles up the seacoast to an isolated beach where we picked mussels right off the washed rocks of the sea and smoked them in a big wood fire covered with seaweed. We had wine and bread and cheese, and Psyche spent the whole day lying on her stomach in jeans and sweater, saying nothing. But when she looked up with her little blue eyes and said, "How oral you are, Smith. You're always eating and drinking." "I am Buddha, empty eat," I said. "Ain't she cute?" said Jaffe. "Psych," I said. "This world is the movie of what everything is. It is one movie, made of the same stuff throughout, belonging to nobody, which is what everything is." "Ah, baloney." We ran around the beach. At one point, Jaffe and Syke were hiking up ahead on the beach, and I was walking alone, whistling Stan Getz Stella. And a couple of beautiful girls up front with their boyfriends heard me, and one girl turned and said, "Swing!" There were natural caves on that beach, where Jaffe had once brought big parties of people and had organized naked bonfire dances. Then the weekdays would come again, and the parties were over, and Jaffe and I would sweep out the shack, we dried bums, dusting small temples. I still had a little left of my grant from last fall in traveler's checks, and I took one and went to the supermarket down on the highway and bought flour, oatmeal, sugar, molasses, honey, salt, pepper, onions, rice, dried milk, bread, beans, black-eyed peas, potatoes, carrots, cabbage, lettuce, coffee, big wood matches for our wood stove, and came staggering back up the hill with all that and a half gallon of red port. Jaffe's neat little spare food shelf was suddenly loaded with too much food. What are we gonna do with all this? We'll have to feed all the bhikkhus. In due time, we had more bhikkhus than we could handle. Poor drunken Joe Mahoney, a friend of mine from the year before, would come out and sleep for 3 days and recuperate for another crack at North Beach and the place. I'd bring him his breakfast in bed. On weekends sometimes, there'd be 12 guys in the shack, all arguing and yakking, and I'd take some yellow cornmeal and mix it with the chopped onions and salt and water and pour out little Johnny cake tablespoons in the hot frying pan with oil, and provide the whole gang with delicious hots to go with their tea. In the Chinese Book of Changes a year ago, I had tossed a couple of pennies to see what the prediction of my fortune was, and it had come out, "You will feed others." In fact, I was always standing over a hot stove. "What does it mean that those trees and mountains out there are not magic, but real?" I'd yell, pointing outdoors. "What?" they'd say. "It means that those trees and mountains out there are not magic, but real." "Yeah?" Then I'd say, "What does it mean that those trees and mountains aren't real at all, just magic?" "Oh, come on." "It means that those trees and mountains aren't real at all, just magic." "Well, which is it, goddammit?" "What does it mean that you ask?" "Well, which is it, goddammit?" I yelled. "Well, what?" "It means that you ask, well, which is it, goddammit?" "Oh, go bury your head in your sleeping bag. Bring me a cup of that hot coffee." I was always boiling big pots of coffee on the stove. "Oh, cut it out," yelled Warren Coughlin. "The chariot will wear down." One afternoon, I was sitting with some children in the grass, and they asked me, "Why is the sky blue?" "Because the sky is blue." "I want to know why the sky is blue." "The sky is blue because you want to know why the sky is blue." "Blue, blue, you," they said. There were also some little kids who came around throwing rocks on our shack roof, thinking it was abandoned. One afternoon, at the time when Jaffe and I had a little jet black cat, they came sneaking to the door to look in. Just as they were about to open the door, I opened it, with the black cat in my arms, and I said in a low voice, "I am the ghost." They gulped and looked at me and believed me and said, "Yeah." Pretty soon they were over the other side of the hill. They never came around throwing rocks again. They thought I was a witch for sure.